Hi everyone, it's Katrina. The Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet is one of the most secretive and mysterious discoveries ever made. That is, if it ever truly existed. The Emerald Tablet is supposedly made of solid emerald and is inscribed with the very secrets of the universe. It was allegedly found in a tomb underneath the statue of Hermes Trismegistus in Tyana, locked in the hands of the corpse, as if even in death, Hermes tried to keep the secret to himself. To understand this a little bit better, we need to look at Hermes Trismegistus. Just like the Emerald Tablet, nobody knows if he was a real person or not. His name is connected directly to the origins of mythological alchemy in Egypt and Greece. He was supposedly the grandfather of Western alchemical philosophy and the author of the Emerald Tablet. He lived roughly 2,000 years ago in the city of Alexandria during Hellenistic Egypt. According to the myth, the Emerald Tablet was inscribed with every scientific principle that rules over the universe. Some legends even say it was Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, who originally wrote it with his own sacred knowledge. Sadly, if the Emerald Tablet does exist, nobody knows where it is. There are some theories that say the tablet was written in the 6th century by an Arabic scholar and burned in the Library of Alexandria during a great fire. Life on Mars. Most people would tell you that we are still looking for proof of life on Mars. NASA currently has rovers on the red planet digging around for the first evidence of organic life. But the secret truth is that we found life on Mars in the 1970s, and it was swept under the rug. Gilbert V. Levin was the principal investigator in 1976 when NASA sent their experimental Viking landers to Mars. He just published an article in the Scientific American Journal arguing that he witnessed positive results showing proof of life, and that his positive results were ignored. The experiment was called Labeled Release, and it was all about testing Martian soil to find trace amounts of organic matter. The Viking probes deposited nutrients into barren Martian soil. The idea was that if life was present in the soil, the living organism would consume the nutrients and leave evidence of itself in the form of gas. Radioactive monitors on the probe would then pick up those gases and confirm life. This is what we call a biological reaction, and it was exactly what happened. The test was a huge success, showing that something consumed the nutrients. It was only microscopic life, but it was evidence of life. The issue was that the other experiments failed to discover organic material, and when NASA tried to duplicate the results of their test in a lab, they failed. They then dismissed the biological reaction as a false positive. They called it an unknown chemical reaction and refused to admit the existence of life on Mars. Even stranger is that when NASA announced one of their more recent landers in 2020, they didn't even bother to include a life detection test. However, new information is coming out about the discovery of life as we speak, and now we have much better technology than the 1970s. Aliens in Antarctica. A secret alien base has just been discovered off the coast of Antarctica, or at least that appears to be the case based on mysterious images from Google Earth. The base is located not in Antarctica itself, but 111 miles from the coast. The base is hiding underwater, and it looks to be positively massive. Satellite images show multiple structures with towering walls spread out across the sea floor. And although the base doesn't seem to be active, the scars left over from its construction are still clear as day. UFO hunters are certainly excited. They say there appear to be 3 submerged structures. One of them is exceptionally long at nearly 50 miles. The other is quite a bit shorter at only 10 miles, while the smallest is only around 5 miles. It's impossible to say what structures may have once stood here. Some claim they could have been landing pads for spacecraft, hangars for vehicles, and other parts of an alien base. But whatever the case is, there has been no mainstream news reporting the discovery. The only people talking about it are those labeled as conspiracy theorists. While it's true the evidence is tenuous at best, there does appear to be a complex of ancient sunken structures off the coast of Antarctica. But are they natural, or were they made by somebody else? Planet 9. Something very strange is happening at the outer edge of our solar system. There is a mysterious object that's been kept a secret from the population for years. The object is about 10 times the mass of our own planet and seems to be pulling other celestial objects towards it. Some have called this thing Planet 9 or Planet X, and they say it's a secret planet at the edge of our own little neighborhood of space. This brings us to a man named Percival Lowell. He was a traveler, businessman, and wealthy amateur astronomer in the 19th century. He became obsessed with the idea of Martians and extraterrestrial life and devoted his fortune to revealing the truth of such things. Percival believed that he discovered ancient canals across the surface of Mars, carved by the last civilization that lived there as they desperately tried to extract water on their dying planet. He also built a huge observatory to try and better see the secrets of the universe. One of his most unusual discoveries was something called Planet 9. He believed that at the edge of the solar system, there lies a phantom planet so massive it's disrupting the orbits of everything around it. The theory has been laughed out of popular culture as nothing but 19th century nonsense. And yet, according to Mike Brown, there is definitely something out there. Mike is the legendary professor of planetary astronomy who demoted Pluto in 2006, taking away its status as a planet. Mike and his colleagues recently released a paper proposing that there is indeed a colossal planet at the edge of the solar system, 10 times the size of Earth. This is exactly what Percival Lowell was suggesting, and yet he is considered a crazy conspiracy theorist. In the end, we don't know what Planet 9 is, or why nobody has ever been able to see it with a telescope. All we know is that there is something big out there, some kind of invisible planet, and it seems to have a significant influence on gravity itself. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Cecilia Gallegos and Mrs. John Winchester. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. The CBU Manuscript. The CBU Manuscript is an ancient text from the 16th century that appears to show exactly how to create multi-stage rockets. The manuscript suggests that 500 years ago, someone figured out how to make rockets using liquid fuel. The manuscript is 450 pages long and was found in Romania in 1961 in the archives at the University of Bucharest. The craziest part of the mystery is that nobody knows who wrote it. The best guess is that it was a German military engineer named Konrad Haas. We know Konrad lived between 1509 and 1576 in the Kingdom of Hungary. He made all kinds of fascinating sketches, mostly for war machines that were never invented. Given the time in which he lived, many of his sketches were way too advanced. Because of his familiarity with rockets, it only makes sense that the mysterious manuscript found in Romania was authored by him. But where did Konrad Haas get his inspiration? This is what stumps the experts. The only thing they had back then were fireworks, which weren't exactly ballistic missiles. Cueva de los Tallos. A major expedition was undertaken in Ecuador in 1976 to search for something out of this world. Among the group of explorers was famous astronaut Neil Armstrong. Neil and the rest of the team went deep into the Ecuadorian jungle in search of Cueva de los Tallos, a mysterious cave said to contain bizarre sculptures, impossible tunnels made by advanced technology, and a metallic library. These things were supposedly left behind by a lost civilization that got a helping hand from alien beings. The cave has been used by the indigenous Shuar people of Ecuador for centuries, as long as any of them can remember. They use the vast underground system as a sacred site. They descend into the blackness using ladders crafted from vines, down into a 213-foot shaft, and then hold ceremonies in the underworld below. The biggest chamber in the cave is nearly 300 feet tall and almost 800 feet wide. The subterranean tunnels go on for just about 3 miles. There are a lot of things in the cave: tarantulas, boa constrictors, scorpions, and nocturnal cave birds. The Shuar considered themselves the guardians of the cave, and never really had any issue until the late 1960s. That was when an explorer named Janos Juan Moritz allegedly snuck into the caves and uncovered a small trove of gold. He was the one who found the artifacts and sculptures and the strange metallic library containing information inscribed on metal tablets. Janos also believed the caves to be purely artificial, carved by advanced intelligence thousands of years ago. This was what inspired the scientific expedition with Neil Armstrong in 1976. There were over 100 people involved, multiple governments, and all the best scientists in the world. The network of caves was mapped extensively. Plant life and animals were recorded in great detail, and there was evidence of human habitation. But there was no metallic library, no gold, and no strange artifacts. Interest in the cave waned after that. But there are still people who want to believe the true discoveries were covered up and the metallic alien tablets taken in secret. Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash is one of the most mysterious mountains in the world. It's also one of the only peaks in India that has never been climbed by modern humans. Nobody has ever reached the top, even though it's way shorter than Mount Everest at only around 21,000 feet. And chances are, nobody ever will. Local legend is that Mount Kailash is a bridge between our world and the kingdom of heaven. In Hindu culture, in Buddhism, and even in Jainism, the mountain is considered the holiest of holy sanctuaries. It's supposedly the abode of Lord Shiva. There are also rumors that the air at high altitudes on the mountain is so powerful it can cause a person to rapidly age. Time allegedly works differently on the mountain. After a climber passes a specific area, they are said to begin aging at an incredibly fast pace, decades in only hours. But there is no way we can know if that's true or not because no one has ever reached the top. There are some who even claim Mount Kailash is no mountain at all, but in reality, a secret pyramid of unimaginable size, hidden underneath the snow. The Anunaki on Mars. Something unbelievable and seemingly impossible has just been found on the surface of Mars. The head of what experts are calling an Anunaki statue has been seen thanks to NASA photographs of the red planet. NASA's Curiosity rover and the Opportunity rover have taken plenty of bizarre images on Mars, most of which have been dismissed as nothing but optical illusions by NASA themselves. We've seen strange domes, what appear to be the crumbling ruins of very old structures, and other things that defy explanation. But this most recent statue is really difficult to brush aside. Images taken by NASA's rover clearly show the broken stone head of a statue that looks like it belongs in ancient Mesopotamia. The statue looks extremely similar to carvings and depictions of the Anunnaki gods found in ancient Sumer. It has 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and the same cone-shaped beard identical to statues found right here on our own planet. Here's where things get a little bizarre. There is a widespread belief that the Anunnaki, a theorized race of space beings, didn't merely colonize Earth many thousands of years ago. People also believe they colonized Mars, creating their own human-like civilization there as well. If this statue is any indication of what happened on Mars back when the planet still had liquid water on its surface, there may have been a real civilization there. There could be pyramids, other statues, and all kinds of ruins hidden just underneath the surface. It could be that the Anunnaki lived on Mars before coming to Earth, where they allegedly bestowed their great knowledge on the human race. Chilean Aliens. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile is one of the driest and most desolate landscapes in the world. It runs along the western coast of South America, a place known as Alien Alley, for the extremely high rate of UFO sightings. It's one of the highest in the world, and so it's kind of ironic that the landscape here is so similar to Mars. The Atacama Desert is also home to numerous amazing geoglyphs, strange pictures carved into the surface of the desert and meant to only be seen from the air. These geoglyphs are similar to the ones in Peru, like the Nazca lines. For a long time, researchers have wondered why primitive people would make pictures that could only be seen from the sky. It's almost as if they were making the geoglyphs for visitors. In November of 2014, Chilean Navy officers testing a new infrared camera on a helicopter captured a flying object on video. It was at an altitude of 4,500 feet, and they managed to track it for several minutes. There was about 9 minutes of footage, which the government released in 2017. When inspecting this footage, image analysis expert Michael Bradbury noticed that the mysterious objects look a lot like geoglyphs in the Atacama Desert. They are diamond-shaped crafts almost identical to one another. It really does seem like the Chilean geoglyphs were meant to be depictions of the ships used by alien visitors, sketched on the ground thousands of years ago. Secret tablets. Mysterious images have appeared online depicting British archaeologists in the 1930s in Iraq. These archaeologists can be seen standing with strange tablets with unbelievable images on them. These tablets seem to show alien creatures with tentacles and many arms interacting with human beings. The tablets are also covered in weird symbols. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about these tablets. They were supposedly taken in 1932 from the famous ziggurat of Ur, a great pyramid made by the Sumerians in 2050 BC. However, the tablets are not in any museum in the world. Nobody knows what happened to them, and nobody even knows if the images of the tablets are real.
Ramses II. In 2012, in Cairo, Egypt, local archaeologists and experts from Germany came across the remains of an ancient statue that they believed to be a depiction of one of the most famous rulers in history, Ramses II. It was discovered in what was once the ancient city of Heliopolis, the capital of worship for the Egyptian sun god Ra 3,000 years ago. Today, this place is a suburb in Egypt's modern capital. The statue has been hidden all this time beneath sand and rubble, never before seen by eyes in the modern world. Finding such a well-preserved artifact in a Cairo suburb in this day and age is basically impossible, which is what makes the discovery so fascinating. Plus, Ramses II is considered one of the greatest kings that ever ruled Egypt. He was in power for 66 years, which was unheard of in the ancient world. Normally, people didn't even live to be 60, and yet Ramses ruled longer than the average lifespan. He expanded the Egyptian empire all the way into Syria and Sudan. And he established borders with the neighboring Hittite Empire without spilling a drop of blood. It was a very rare event because royal reigns were nasty, animalistic, and short. And his face can be seen all across Egypt, depicted in the giant sculptures at Abu Simbel, at Ramesseum, and apparently even hiding under the streets of Cairo. Reptile in the Alps. The enormous tooth of an extinct marine reptile was just discovered high up in the Swiss Alps. According to the experts, this could be the largest tooth ever found belonging to this prehistoric species of Leviathan, a great monster that prowled the primordial oceans of our planet millions of years ago. It's called an ichthyosaur, and it first appeared on Earth 250 million years ago. That was in the early part of the Triassic period. It then continued to live in some form or another up until 90 million years ago. What's really interesting is that between its first appearance and its last, the ichthyosaur went through many changes. It grew to massive proportions, weighing 88 tons and reaching up to 65 feet long. But then it devolved to be no bigger than a modern dolphin. The tooth recently found in the mountains belonged to one of the bigger species, perhaps the biggest. It's known as the gigantic ichthyosaur, and it died out approximately 200 million years ago. They were unearthed between 1976 and 1990 during geological surveys, but were only recently analyzed in detail. So how in the world did the tooth get on the top of a mountain? It's actually a pretty easy question to answer. Millions of years ago, the Alps weren't 9,100 feet above sea level. They were actually below sea level, deep beneath the water surrounding the supercontinent known as Pangaea. But over time, as plate tectonics pushed the Alps up to form mountains and the sea levels changed, the tooth climbed higher and higher until it literally touched the sky. Wartime Archaeology. While digging defenses in the port city of Odessa in 2022, Ukrainian soldiers came across unexpected archaeological treasures. In the midst of the war between Ukraine and Russia, nobody could have expected Ukrainian soldiers to turn into amateur archaeologists. and yet they dug up a trove of artifacts dating back to the 3rd century BC. These soldiers are members of the Ukrainian 126th Territorial Defense, and they uncovered a large collection of amphorae. This is a fancy name for the ancient containers used by the Greeks, the Romans, and the Byzantines. The containers were usually for transporting liquids and dry goods, anything from olive oil to wine to grain. These particular containers were likely used by the Romans. What a lot of people don't know is that the port city of Odessa actually began its life as a small Roman settlement by the name of Odessus. When Ukrainian soldiers got wind that Russia was planning to strike the city, they started digging trenches. And it was in one of those trenches that these mysterious artifacts were discovered. But sadly, the discovery is unimportant in comparison to what has been lost. Ukrainian officials say over 2,000 precious works of art have been stolen. At least 127 culturally important sites in the country have been damaged. Russian shelling destroyed an entire museum on May 7th, and gold artifacts over 2,300 years old, precious items from the Scythian culture, have been looted since the war started. The sword in the sewer. Something unbelievable was recently discovered deep inside a sewer in Denmark. A pipe layer by the name of Jannik Vestergaard was conducting work on a street in the city of Aalborg when he and an engineer came across a sword from the 12th century. This was a medieval weapon, likely wielded by a warrior, lost for nearly 1,000 years, and it turned up in a sewer. The men took the sword to Kenneth Nielsen, an archaeologist with the Historical Museum of Northern Jutland. After inspecting the sword, Kenneth came to the conclusion that it had probably been lost in the 1300s, but may have been forged at least a century earlier. It was discovered in a layer of waste which has accumulated over one of the oldest layers of pavement in the city, which now is deep underground. Because of its age and the fact that it had been forged much earlier than it was lost, experts say it's very possible it had an extremely rich history even before it was discarded. It was fully complete and well saved, and the double-edged blade is still sharp. Unfortunately, we don't know who the sword belonged to, but Kenneth Nielsen thinks it was lost by a warrior during a battle. A sword was a status symbol in the Middle Ages, dragged both on and off the battlefield and constantly buried with its owner as precious grave goods. Because Denmark was plunged into chaos in the 13th century, with civil war spreading throughout the nation, there were plenty of fights happening in the streets. The owner of the sword could have been defeated. The weapon fell to the ground, and then it got pushed so deeply into the mud that nobody noticed it for centuries. Goddess buried in a field. A Palestinian farmer by the name of Abu Aid was cultivating his land when he came across an ancient statue from 4,500 years ago. The statue was broken with only its head remaining, but it was in good enough condition that archaeologists were able to identify who the face was modeled after. The statue was made in the likeness of the ancient Canaanite goddess of love and beauty, Anat. The farmer is pretty proud of his discovery, telling local news how happy he is that the Palestinian land still has archaeological value. This statue is proof that the people of the region have been there for thousands of years, since the days of the Canaanites, one of the earliest civilizations in the world. Initially thinking of selling it, Abu Aid changed his mind after an archaeologist told him the ancient relic had great archaeological value. If the name of this ancient culture sounds familiar, that's because they are mentioned in the Bible. It's in the Bible that God tells the people of Israel to drive away the Canaanites, exiling them from the Promised Land because of their wickedness and their false gods. Anat, the goddess this statue is made after, was one of those false gods mentioned in the Bible. Axe in the backyard. Angela Smith served as the Liberal Democratic MP for the area of Penistone and Stocksbridge in the United Kingdom between 2010 and 2019. Surprisingly, in 2022, she came across a Bronze Age artifact while digging in her garden. The former MP accidentally became an archaeologist that day, pulling an ancient axe caked in dirt and centuries of rust right out of her backyard. Angela shared photos of the mysterious artifact online, but we haven't heard of any real archaeologists getting involved in the case. No one knows where the axe came from or who it once belonged to. It could be anywhere from 100 to 5,000 years old. There's just no way of knowing. And believe it or not, Angela wasn't the only one to find something strange in her backyard. During the pandemic lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, people found all kinds of ancient things while digging in flower beds. A man named Peter Revel even found Neolithic arrowheads, scraps of Roman pottery, and an ancient belt hook while planting roses. Other treasures unearthed included a post-medieval belt hook in the shape of a snake found in Herefordshire, and a medieval silver coin discovered under a lawn in Stoke-on-Trent. Mysterious gravestone. A 240-year-old gravestone was just discovered on the banks of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. The grave marker weighs over 200 pounds. It's covered in moss, and the inscription on the front was carved by hand. The gravestone reads Thaddeus J. Peck, 1711 to 1781, and has a cross carved into the top. Historians don't know who this Peck character was, but they know he died before the state of Ohio was even settled by Europeans. In fact, this gravestone is so old that the Declaration of Independence had only been penned 5 years before. When this guy died, George Washington was a general leading the Continental Army against British troops. The gravestone was discovered on April 18, 2022. A couple of fishermen heading down to their usual spot noticed the stone sticking out of the dirt. After they wiped the grime away, they realized they had come across a legit treasure. So they contacted the Historical Society, and now we have a real mystery on our hands. Seeing as Ohio wasn't established until 1803, and Cuyahoga Falls wasn't even established until 1812, what was an old pioneer doing in the Ohio wilderness in 1781? Not only that, what was a 70-year-old man doing deep in Native American territory? The average life expectancy for someone living in America was only 38 years back then. Thaddeus J. Peck lived way beyond his expectancy. He was far from his own people, and yet was seemingly important enough to be buried and given his own tombstone. The oldest rifle in Minnesota. In the 1960s, an unusual relic was discovered on the shoreline of Lower Hay Lake in Minnesota. The relic was a seemingly ordinary rifle stock, except it was very old. It had an engraved side plate in the shape of a water serpent. That kind of rifle stock hasn't been made in centuries. In fact, local historian Ray Nelson was shocked to see it, because the weapon looked just like the rifles early Europeans used to trade with Native Americans. Nelson spent many years searching for this rifle, and it appears to be the oldest rifle artifact yet found in Minnesota. The mysterious rifle has been housed in the Crow Wing County Museum ever since it was found. But it wasn't until recently that scientists did a real analysis to find out just how old the weapon is. They were able to determine the stock was made out of birchwood, which had mostly been used in Denmark, Germany, and Sweden to make rifles. After a bit more research, Ray Nelson was able to pinpoint the location of the rifle's construction as the German region of Odenwald. It's likely that the rifle was brought to America by very early German immigrants in the 18th century, who then traded the weapon to the Native Americans. Then, somehow, it got discarded at the edge of the river, where it wasn't found again for nearly 300 years. Artifacts under a Cambodian temple. Battambang is a beautiful beach city in the country of Cambodia. It's popular with backpackers, has thriving nightlife, and it's rich in culture and Buddhist history. In one of the city's many Buddhist temples, officials accidentally came across a small collection of artifacts and coins hidden beneath the floor. The temple, which is located in the Mang Rusay district, is over 300 years old. It's in pretty bad shape, and it's basically a death trap waiting to collapse. So the locals decided to build a new one. But when they began to dismantle the 17th century temple, they were shocked to find the hidden treasure. According to the provincial deputy governor, excavators found the treasure inside a mysterious hole underneath the temple. They pulled out 20 pieces of pottery, a collection of copper bells, about 24 Siamese copper coins, and 3,000 ancient silver coins. Nobody knows at this point where the artifacts came from or why they were buried underneath the temple. It looks like sometime in the last 300 years, a local monk got a hold of some loot, dug a hole, and stashed it there. Either that or the treasure had been hiding down in that hole since before the temple was even built. Artifacts at Cape Canaveral. Students from the University of Central Florida discovered artifacts in one of the most unlikely locations imaginable. Near the Banana River, at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, they uncovered prehistoric stone spear points dating back 6,000 years. What today is a highly sophisticated station dedicated to space travel was once a gathering place for Native Americans. It's a little shocking when you think about just how much things have changed in a few thousand years. Beginning in 2017, anthropology students with UCF and U.S. Air Force Space Launch Delta 45 have been doing archaeological research at the highly restricted Cape Canaveral. They discovered that there were once hundreds of Native American sites spread across the surrounding area, but most were destroyed during construction of missile ranges and military facilities. Thousands of years of history were wiped out by 50 years of rocketry. But not everything was totally erased. The students have found clusters of what appear to be feasting areas. They found several different sites filled with shells from where the Native Americans had gorged themselves on seafood. Then, when they went digging about 400 feet from the shore of the Banana River at the Penny site, they found the spear points. These spear points were used by the original hunter-gatherers of North America to take down big game. It's pretty amazing to see this kind of archaeological research being done at a space station, of all places.
Egyptian head in the attic. After a homeowner passed away in a small English town on the coast of East Kent, a mummy's head was discovered in a glass case in the attic. At an unspecified date in the 1820s, the 2,700-year-old Egyptian mummy was shipped to someone in Ramsgate as a souvenir. After that person's death, his brother was clearing out his belongings, and the very last thing he had expected to find was the severed head of a dead ancient Egyptian. Unsure what to do with such a relic, the brother donated the head to the Canterbury Museums and Galleries collection. And just recently, in 2020, scientists decided to do some X-rays to try and gain a little more information about this mysterious head. They were able to determine the mummy was an adult female, while CT scans showed that her brain had been completely removed. This suggests she had visited something in ancient Egypt called a Père Néfer, or a house of beauty, after she died. This would have been where the first part of her mummification process began. While House of Beauty may sound nice, it was anything but. The dead woman would have had her brain removed through her nasal bone by a man with a hammer and some chisels. Oh yes, and don't forget about the iron hook to yank out all of her brain matter. Anything that was left would be scooped out using a spoon before the cranial cavity was rinsed with water. Craig Bowen, one of the men involved in the recent study, says it's ironic that ancient Egyptians believed a person's thoughts were contained in their heart and that their brain was pretty much useless. Middle-class Pompei. The Pompei Archaeological Park in Italy is one of the most unique and unusual places in the world. It's an ancient city that was destroyed in a flash of fire and brimstone in the year 79 AD. Mount Vesuvius erupted unexpectedly, burying the ancient Roman city in ash and volcanic debris. Looking at Pompeii from a human perspective, it was most likely one of the biggest tragedies in ancient Rome. It would have been like if a volcano wiped out New York City and everyone who lives there. It truly would have been an utterly devastating event. But since it happened so long ago, people visit Pompeii with their kids and their cameras, like they would a theme park. Archaeological investigations have been going on here for decades, with researchers always finding something new. Their most recent discovery in Pompeii was a little unusual. Researchers came across a home with all of its furnishings still intact. Director of Excavations, Gabriel Zuchtriegel, says the home matches the domestic environment of an ordinary Pompeii citizen. It contained a wooden dishware closet, a trunk with its lid open, decorative bowls and accent tables, and everything one might expect from a normal family. But here's where the house gets even more interesting. It's very clear by going from room to room that these were the epitome of ordinary Roman people. They weren't wealthy enough to decorate all 5 rooms of their house, and hadn't even managed to paint all the walls. One of the rooms was even used for storage, suggesting the family had been hoarding a bunch of junk. It's a pretty shocking discovery because it goes to show that even after 2,000 years, people have changed very little. They also found an oil lamp found depicting the ancient Greek god Zeus, the Pompeii equivalent of a modern superhero lamp. Dino footprints. A person went to a restaurant in China to get a meal and ended up making a surprise archaeological discovery. The restaurant was relatively new, having only opened in the past year. The customer chose to sit in the courtyard and enjoy the sunny day, and when they looked down at their feet, they noticed a very strange impression on the ground in the dirt. Upon further inspection, the impression appeared to be a dinosaur footprint. After some paleontologists showed up to investigate the discovery, they were able to identify 2 footprints of sauropods from the Cretaceous period, over 100 million years ago. According to Lida Xing, a paleontologist from the China University of Geosciences, sauropods used to be the biggest animals on Earth. They were positively enormous and roamed across the Sichuan province of China prior to the asteroid that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Sauropod tracks aren't necessarily rare in the area, but are not usually found in restaurants downtown. So, how did these footprints go unnoticed for so long? After all, most of downtown is covered in a thick layer of cement. The answer is that the restaurant had previously been a chicken farm. Because of that, nobody had noticed the indentations of the prints covered in chicken poop. It wasn't until the chickens were taken away, the farm was transformed into a restaurant, and the dirt became a garden-style courtyard. Missing Picasso sketch. An old and very valuable piece of art was just discovered in the unlikeliest of places. A tourist was visiting the Spanish vacation island of Ibiza when they drew the attention of Spain's tax agency and civil guard. The passenger arrived on the Spanish island from Switzerland and had some rather mysterious drawings in their luggage. When asked about the drawings, the unnamed passenger simply said they were some cheap copies and weren't worth any kind of money. But something just wasn't sitting right with the Ibiza border security. Something about the drawings struck them as being old. Too old for a tourist to have on a party island. As it turns out, the guards were 100% correct. The tourist had been trying to smuggle in a genuine work from Pablo Picasso, worth an estimated $461,000. It's a work of art called Trois Personnages from 1966. Perhaps you've heard of it. Now, here's a quick bit of info that might just win you your next trivia night. Pablo Picasso was born in Spain in the year 1881. He completed 13,500 paintings in his life and distributed roughly 100,000 prints. He was such a prolific artist that his stuff can be found in every corner of the globe, and every now and then, a random piece of his art shows up somewhere strange, like a Spanish airport. We're not sure what the tourist was doing with the painting, but we do know he had it confiscated by officials at the airport. He could also be brought up on charges of smuggling as a result of his poor decisions. The Mastodon. A construction crew in Michigan was in the middle of replacing an old culvert when they stumbled upon something very unexpected. The excavator was ripping a pipe out of the ground when he realized there was something red that looked an awful lot like a giant bone sticking out of the mud. Everyone stopped what they were doing to get the mysterious object out of the muck, and then they just kind of stood around looking at it. This was no ordinary bone. It was a piece of a mastodon skeleton, a physical piece of a prehistoric Ice Age beast. Mastodons lived at the same time as woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, though to be honest, mastodons were a little shorter than mammoths, only growing roughly 10 feet tall and weighing 6 tons. But they were still some of the coolest animals of the Ice Age, and they lived all across the United States. From what scientists at the Grand Rapids Public Museum can tell, the mastodon was a juvenile who died about 11,700 years ago. That was when human beings had already begun to settle in areas throughout the region. What dinosaur skeleton would you like to find in your backyard? Fossils in the Himalayas. If there is one place you would never expect to find fossils of sea ammonites, it's in the Himalaya Mountains. And yet, at the top of the Himalayas, and all throughout the region, thousands upon thousands of feet above sea level, there are fossilized shells, pebbles, and marine animals. Specifically in Nepal, these fossils can be found pretty much everywhere in the mountains. Ammonites are shelled sea creatures that, when fossilized, look kind of like a slinky got embedded in a rock. Their shells leave a very distinct imprint, and they are scattered like loose change all throughout the Himalayas. So, why are there fossils of sea creatures from 240 million years ago being found over 20,000 feet above sea level? It has to do with the way the Himalayas were formed millions of years ago. After the breaking up of Pangaea, the single landmass that existed before there were continents, the land masses kept on moving. India started out nearly 10,000 kilometers from its current location 150 million years ago. It took 100 million years for it to slowly drift away from Antarctica to collide with the Asian mainland. And when the collision happened, the converging crusts of these two gigantic pieces of land mashed together with unbelievable force. The land crumpled upward to create what is now the Himalaya Mountains. You can think of the mountain range kind of like the seam between two land masses, like the seam on a weld when two pieces of metal are joined together. The reason there are fossils of sea creatures in the mountains is that millions of years ago, the land that is now in the clouds was once at the bottom of the ocean. Sea creatures died and floated to the bottom, turned into fossils, and then plate tectonics shifted everything up to the surface. The Death Garden. In 2022, an 88-year-old grandmother was mysteriously finding human bones in her flower beds. Her name is Anne Mathers from the West Midlands in England. The first skull was found in July just sitting in her flowers, right outside the terrace of her home where she has lived for the past 60 years. But the skull wasn't the only thing she found. She continued coming across femur bones and other random pieces of somebody's skeleton. They just kept showing up in her yard, and she had no idea what was going on. Naturally, Anne Mathers called the police to report what was happening to her. The cops came to investigate and soon found the culprit. It wasn't a sick serial murderer dumping bones in the grandmother's garden, but a badger. The culprit was a fuzzy local critter. Anne happens to live pretty close to a cemetery, and badgers had tunneled underneath the graves and up through Anne's garden. As they tunneled through the rotting coffins of long-dead humans, they dragged their bones along with them, and the bones ended up getting dumped in Anne's flowers. It was unexpected and terrifying for Anne, but just another day for busy English badgers. Mysterious stone balls. Inside of an ancient tomb on the Scottish island of Sanday, archaeologists came across a pair of bizarre polished stone balls. The balls are about the size of baseballs. They are completely smooth and were beaten into shape about 5,500 years ago. That was during the days of Neolithic Britain, right before construction on Stonehenge began. These balls were an unexpected discovery simply for the reason that they are strange. Nobody actually knows what the balls were meant for. Some think they may have been weapons, some of the earliest projectiles in history. These balls may have been put in a sling and hurled at one's enemies. On the other hand, some researchers say they were for artistic purposes only. They may have been used to signify a person's status within their community, or used as religious totems. Even more fascinating is just how long it would have taken to craft these polished balls. Vicky Cummings from the University of Central Lancashire says it would have taken a lot of hours of polishing the rock with sand and water. This was no easy task, especially seeing as Neolithic people had a lot of stuff they needed to be doing. These balls were clearly important, but experts can't agree why. Van in the walls. A family in Germany was renovating their vacation home when they found something both ridiculous and unbelievable hiding in the wall. The renovation started with a demolition. The family needed to completely tear down the old and rotting wood so that they could rebuild from scratch, making a new and better vacation property. As they were demolishing the house, they found an old Ford Transit van inside the wall on the other side of the bathroom. They had an entire van in the walls of their house and had never known it. For some crazy reason, the shell of the van had been integrated into the building and sealed up behind the wall. The van had no engine in it. It was just the outer husk with no windows or seats. There could be a reasonable explanation for what happened here. We know that the family purchased the vacation home in the 1990s. It was nothing but an old wooden shack with an outside kitchen and a small space inside. The family fixed it up over the years before this recent complete teardown. It's believed the structure may have started as nothing but a camper van, just a family parked in the woods, then was expanded slowly but surely, and the van just kind of became a part of the structure. The basement specimens. It was in 2006 when a story went viral involving bizarre specimens of strange creatures found in a London basement beneath an orphanage. According to the original story, there was a man named Thomas Merlin, an obvious nod at King Arthur's court wizard Merlin, who passed away. After he died, specimens unlike anything ever seen before were found cluttered in his basement. He had allegedly been a hunter of all things strange and curious, a cryptozoologist obsessed with wacky monsters and things that go bump in the night. Among the things in his collection were fairies, strange skeletons of demons and baby dragons, screaming mummies, the mummified remains of mermaids, and what might just be vampires. It was all very weird, and all the specimens looked like they came straight out of a fantasy novel. Sadly, that's exactly where they all came from. This story was later debunked as a lot of nonsense. These specimens were real, but they were inventions of a guy named Alex, an illustrator and sculptor with a warped imagination based in London. The specimens were used as clever marketing for his own cryptid museum. Thanks for watching! What's the strangest thing you've ever discovered in an unexpected place? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye!